Right there we've got a tattered cloud. And when you see a cloud like that, it is actually a cloud that is in the process of falling apart. That particular cloud is raining, or has been raining. And chunks of it have just been falling out. And that's why you see clouds that look like that sometimes. Because it rained. That is a cloud that has rained.
So we're going to talk about how do our brains work and how do they respond to trauma, and what do we do when our brains are responding to trauma, right, even though we're safe. And also honoring our bodies for having that response, right? So, has anybody ever heard the terms zones of regulation? Okay, so that's, I think it's mostly here in Columbus has become really popular from Dr. Bruce Perry. So I break it down into different color zones. So these different color zones are parts of our brain. Everybody has these parts of our brain. Everybody functions through them, right? The difference is trauma affects it. Trauma either affects it in development. If we're experiencing childhood trauma, these things may develop later in life. Or we jump through different zones faster because of the trauma we've experienced, right? We also think about our brain in a hand. So we have this is our green zone or our prefrontal cortex. This is our midbrain, and this is our brainstem or amygdala. That's that trauma response, that alarm or fire alarm, right? So in our brainstem is responsible for all of our involuntary functioning, right? All of the stuff that happens in our body that we don't have to think about. Our heart rate, our hunger, our blood pressure, our breathing, right? Because if we had to think, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. We'd never do anything else, right? I also forget my keys every other week, so I probably wouldn't make it if I had to think, breathe in, breathe out, my heart rate, right? Also in this section is our trauma response, or our fight, flight, or freeze. And again, if you think about it, it's really wild and really cool that our body automatically does these things to keep us safe. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to notice that we're in danger, right? And so, fight or flight, when that happens, it prepares our body to fight or run away. So when that's kicked in, it sends signals throughout all of our bodies. So our thoughts start racing to make sure we're making the right decision. We get tunnel vision so we can see quickly, or see more clearly. Our breath is quicker and shallower to get oxygen throughout our bloodstream to prepare our muscles to fight or run away. So then we get lightheaded. Adrenaline goes throughout our body. Our blood vessels are contracting. Our bladder releases in response to stress. We get sweaty to help our body cool down. Right? Again, all the things that automatically happen. And then we have freeze, which again is super awesome that our body does this. Our body has a response to protect our mental health, right? It's saying we can't escape this, so we have to cut off mentally to protect that, right? Another reason that our bodies were designed that way to protect our mental health, which is more affirmation of how important our mental health is, right? If we were created to have that system and to protect that, that shows how important our mental health is, right? And so, the freeze part is that dissociation, right? We go somewhere else to protect that mental health, right? Once that trauma response, our body has experienced something that we have been unsafe, it's going to be triggered more, right? My smoke alarm in my house might go off way more often because I burn more pasta than maybe your guys' smoke alarm in your house, right? It's more sensitive. And so that's all in our brainstem. And our midbrain is where our emotions are. This is where a kid who can't sit still or always wants to be silly or plays too much, right? They're in the midbrain. This is driven by emotions, maybe hyperactivity, and our memory is also stored here. We have things like black and white thinking, so you're either my enemy or my friend, right? You're either good or you're bad. I'm either perfect or awful, right? There is no in between, right? And then we have our prefrontal cortex, which is all of our logical thinking, right? This is being able to say, hey, my friend was late picking me up, but they're still my friend. They just made a mistake, right? This is problem-solving skills. Okay, I'm going to learn that tomorrow I have to get up 15 minutes early because there's always a train that comes at 9:15, so I want to beat it, right? Also, in these sections, allows us to see only so far into the future, right? So if we're in our brainstem, we can only think within seconds, right? Which makes sense. If we're in a part where we have to keep ourselves safe, right? We can't think, oh, did I take the chicken out for dinner, right? We don't have time to think about that. We have to keep ourselves safe right here and right now. And our midbrain is only within a minute to a day. So this is a toddler who, okay, now it's Johnny's turn to play with this, has an absolute fit because they think they're never going to see that toy ever again, right? And then this is, hey, Mom, Dad, I have a project due tomorrow, and by the way, I need a poster, crayons, and markers, right, to do it. Prefrontal cortex is, I'm going to do all my work on Monday so I can enjoy the weekend, right? This is, I'm going to eat salad Monday through Friday so I can eat pizza and brownies on Saturday, right? Things like that. Again, how this is helpful is because then we can realize where we're at mentally and what we're capable of, right? If we're in our brain, if we notice our kids in the brainstem and they're supposed to be learning the next math assignment, they're not going to be able to do it because they're in brainstem. Or how this works with your own body is, my child did something that was really unsafe, and I need them to know in this moment that it was unsafe, right? You're also heightened. You're also probably in brainstem, so you can't access the skills and developmental needs of the child for them to learn that in that moment, right? So what happens? We often yell and react and things like that, and our child thinks they're in trouble, when really our goal is help them to be safe, right? So how this works is, say, this is how trauma kind of comes into play. Say you are at an apple orchard picking apples. You're with your family, it smells like apples in the air, and then all of a sudden there's a tiger there, right? Our trauma response is going to kick in, right? It's going to prepare us, we're going to either fight this tiger or we're going to run away, right? All those things are going to come in. Safeguard our bodies, right? We need that to happen because we need to keep ourselves safe, right? But then, 2 weeks later, we're in Kroger getting groceries, and they just delivered a bunch of apples, and it smells like apples. And that trauma response kicks in. Not helpful, right? Not helpful to fight the apples in Kroger when I need to get my chicken parmesan ingredients to feed my family later, right? And the thing is, we don't always know what those triggers are, right? They can happen at a subconscious level. And what can be really frustrating for, working with kiddos with trauma, but also kiddos who have trauma and complex trauma, is that relation isn't always so clear, right? And so, but what do we do, right? We recognize when we're in a trauma response, right? So there are going to be times that maybe we can predict when a trigger is going to happen, right? And in that time we can prepare. What are we going to do, right? But that isn't always the case. Sometimes we're noticing the reactions in the fight or flight before the actual trigger, right? And so this is how this may look in a day, right? So you may have a typical child, right, who hasn't experienced trauma, had gotten love, healthy relationships, stability, and safety. And then you have a child who has experienced trauma and inadequate safety and stability, right? So they wake up really late in the morning, and their caregiver is rushing them to get out of bed, coming down. They also spill their cereal and make a big mess, and so it's coming down. They didn't get anything to eat, so it's coming down. But then they got to school, and their teacher says, hey, I'm really glad to see you today. And then it comes back up a little bit. But then they realize they have a test that they didn't study for, so it comes down to here. And then they accidentally bumped their toe on the desk, so then it comes down here. But then they get to the recess, and this ball they've been looking forward to playing with all day isn't there, and so they're there. What the adult is seeing is not all of those things that led up to that, but now the behavior, now the tantrum, right? And so it's like, wow, like they can't adjust, or, oh, they don't know how to share, right? When really, we're down here already, and we just need to figure out how to get out of here. So we're not judging that, what is wrong with you, what is wrong with this behavior, but what Julie was explaining, the why, right? And oftentimes the why is that we're in our brainstem, or we're in our midbrain, and we can't access the skills to complete this task. And that's okay. And this works for children and adults, right? All this information is super helpful. Now, what do we do with it, right? How do we get from zone to zone? And the answer is regulation. So regulation is any type of repetitive movement. So this actually, and again, this sounds really corny. I'm a therapist, love mindfulness, regulation, all things like that. And I think it sounds corny, but, right, biology says that. This goes back to being in the womb, right? What did the babies hear the whole time? The mother's heart rate, the breathing, the movement, right? That repetitiveness that started to build neural pathways, right? And so by doing regulation, we're providing connectivity in the brain, right? And allowing us to access higher functioning parts of our brain, right? So some activities that might be super helpful is hopscotch, ripping up paper, scribbling on paper, jumping jacks, pacing, racing, things like leapfrog, boozing, playing on a tambourine, bouncing a ball, playing basketball, kicking a ball, bouncing a ball on a wall, rolling a ball back and forth, kicking a ball. This might be, especially if your child's in the middle of a tantrum and you're outside kicking a ball, right? The bigger the feeling, the bigger body movement, right? So on this side, I have 1 through 10, right? So if our child is on 10, we want a bigger body movement. So in the previous breakout session, someone asked a good question, right? And it actually brought me back. When I first learned about regulation, I worked at Children's Services, and they were like, you know, if you notice a parent is in the red zone, you can have them get you a glass of water. And I was like, oh, I'm going to stop you in the middle of this very probably traumatic conversation that we're having for you to meet my needs, right? No, right? And so I really appreciated that call out because I had said, you know, they're like, what if my child's in this? And it was like, okay, you can have them do work, right? Grab the laundry basket from upstairs to downstairs. You're going down and up the stairs, right? Go and get the mail from the mailbox, right? And it's like, no, they're not going to want to do that in the middle of a tantrum. And quite frankly, they're not going to want to do any of this on their own in general, right? Because our body knows us, right? At one point, these things kept us safe, right? And so when we notice those things in ourselves or in our children, not judging it, but honoring that, right? Again, that's super awesome. That kept me safe and that kept me here. But it's not helpful. And it might even be hurting me right now, right? And so really being mindful of what I need and what I can do in this moment, right? And so at the very least, if you notice your child is in that red zone, you regulating yourself, co-regulating, right? So maybe you're pacing back and forth, right? And we're not going to pace back and forth like this, right? We're not going to be angry, but calmly pacing back and forth because they're going to see that. Maybe we're tapping, right? Maybe we're scribbling. And again, the younger the child, the bigger you're going to want it to be too, right? So I may not just be sitting down scribbling, but I may be going like this. I may be moving, rainbow breathing faster, right? I may be doing a dance, things like that. So as an example, this kiddo in the red zone, sorry, I didn't even say what I do. So I'm a child trauma therapist with Nationwide Children's Hospital. I see people at home, in school, in the community, things like that, oftentimes where their traumas happened, right? And we get this really cool opportunity to create that therapeutic space in that home. And oftentimes, and I do get to do some real life, right, regulation, right? So they're having a tantrum, and so I'm marching back and forth in the living room, right? 40 minutes goes by, right? Hoping this child follows me. They don't. They never do. But at one point, I start making it a dance, right? Because I know this child loves to dance. She loves the group. We actually usually do a dance at the beginning of each session for regulation and attachment, right? And then she starts laughing at me, right? Brianne, you don't know how to dance. And so she gets up and she dances, right? So maybe that regulation wasn't something she was ready to do, but at least my co-regulation allowed her to be able to come up a little bit that she can engage in a different regulation. Right? We're not going to always know the answers either. So I would say have 2 or 3 things in your toolbox that you can do, right? So maybe I scribbled, right, and that didn't work. Or maybe I tapped and that didn't work. But I'm going to keep going and I'm going to keep trying because at the very least, you're modeling how to handle your own reactions. So this is then how generational trauma works, right? Maybe my child's behavior is triggering my own reactions. And so these zones of regulation are helpful because it's like, where am I at? If I need to set a boundary or teach a lesson for my child, I cannot do that if I'm in the red zone. I can't. I just simply can't. And it allows you to give yourself some grace too, right? Because it makes sense. I can't do that when I'm in my red zone. I'm focused on keeping myself safe. So while co-regulating, you're really regulating yourself, right? And so this may look like, for me and my child, right? She may be having a tantrum and she's getting loud and yelling. And my brain is going into the red zone, right? I also have to tell myself, you can be mad and I can still be safe, right? You can be loud and I'm still safe, right? You can yell and I'm still safe, right? Because reminding ourselves, Brianne, your body, you don't need that trauma response because you are safe, right? That response is in there because it kept us safe at one point. So if we're already safe, we don't need that, right? And so that regulation can be really helpful. And again, it may take a bit to figure out what is that regulation that helps best for that child, right? Maybe they do love to run and jump, but maybe they actually really prefer when you brush their hair or put on lotion for them. Maybe they really enjoy when you paint each other's nails. So something else that can be helpful, because when we're in that trauma response, we can't access our memories in our midbrain, right? Is grounding. Has anybody ever heard the term grounding before?
Yes.
Not like grounding and you're not going anywhere, seeing your friend or TV. But grounding, right, of I'm here and I'm now, right, I'm safe. And so again, that reminder, what happens when that fight or flight or freeze is kicked in, our body thinks that we're not safe, but we had to remind our body we are here and we are safe, right? And so that happens through enacting our 5 senses. So our sight, our hearing, our touch, our smell, our taste, right? And so maybe you notice either yourself feeling just off. You might want to do some grounding, or your child, right, being just off. Or if you know that they're going to experience a trigger, you may say things that are helpful for them or have them do something. So I'll give an example. I had this kiddo and he was going to visit his mom. It was a supervised visit, and we were talking about how triggering that is. Usually has blow-ups at foster home when he's done. He said, you know what, you can count the ceiling tiles, or you can count the brown squares on the floor, right? Seeing, I'm here, I'm safe, right? Reminding us we're supervised, nothing bad can happen, right? So then we have a team meeting, and they're talking about how the visit went, and he did well at the foster home after. And they're like, that visit was awful. All he did was stare up at the ceiling. My mind, I'm like, that's wonderful. He did grounding, right? And so then we go into explaining that, right? But that reminder, I am here and I am safe. And so we're going to walk through a little series now of grounding. and then we'll go to questions. Does that sound good? Okay, so I want you to look around the room and name 5 red things you can see. I apologize if you're colorblind. You can pick your own color, by the way. Red's really hard to see. All right, Dante, what 5 red things do you see?
Carpet on the ground, red pews, stop or exit sign, a red box on the window, and my red folder.
Now, I want you to notice 4 things you can feel. So not just reach out and feel, but what do your feet feel like in your shoes? What does your torso feel like in your shirt, right? What does your mouth feel like when it talks? Different touch points of your body, not just your hands. Now nobody's looking at me because they don't want to go. Can you say 4 things that you feel?
My feet, legs, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I feel me.
Yeah.
I feel my neck or the hurts,
Nice.
and I feel this.
Nice. All right, now you can either leave your eyes open or close them. And now I want you to name 3 things you can hear. And once you've done so, open your eyes. All right, can you name 3 things you heard?
The hiss from the PA, the air conditioner, a woman coughed outside, but the breathing in the room.
Nice. Now we're going to do 2 things you can smell. Might have to get really descriptive with it. Can you name 2 things you smell?
My perfume and my
Now last one thing you can taste. So this one, I still taste cheddar from my lunch. Right? And so sometimes with some of my clients are like, I went to do that, but I couldn't remember what was 5, what was 4. That doesn't matter, right? It's just all about the 4 going through the 5 senses. There are different ways to just enact those senses too. We just want to heighten them, because remember, we got to remind our body we are here and we are safe and we're okay. So for sight, we may go on a scavenger hunt. We may look for all pink things, or we may be in a room, maybe it's before bedtime and we know bedtime is triggering. We may look around our room and what are 5 things that bring us a smile, right? What are 5 things that we might see in our dreams tonight, right? I remember hearing more grounding things and about like infants and the sights and things like that, and it was right before I was having a child. I was like, oh my gosh, I need to get way more pictures in my child's room. You may, again, look around the room and go through the rainbow, right, and those things. You may look around the room and count tiles, right? If they're in school, maybe they're hopping from tile to tile, right? Only the brown ones or only the green ones, right? Or maybe we're only walking along the lines, right? Maybe we're going every other, right? Again, I see kids in school, so I like to do either regulating or grounding after we've done therapy to remind them where we're at, right? Sometimes it gets a little wild because we'll do follow the leader and they have me crawling down the school hallway like a cat, but it is what it is. Touch is a really good one. We can hold an ice cube. We can splash cold water in our face. We can put on lotion. That's a good sense, regulation, and grounding. Brush our hair, paint our nails. Does this smell? I have some scented markers, right, where I can regulate and color and smell it. Taste might be having M&Ms and trying to guess the different colors, or Skittles. Having dark chocolate and milk chocolate and switching them and talking about the difference. Eating something really sour. I'll notice a lot of times in my sessions I'll offer gum or mints because it can be regulating and the smell, right? I had a principal, he was like, yeah, now he comes in and he steals a handful of mints. And again, right, I'm like, that's great, that's really good grounding, right? Sure, I wish you would ask, but baby steps for grounding. And so all these things to enact, right, our five senses. Maybe for touch, we're comparing the texture of our different animals or our favorite stuffed animals or our blankets. Maybe we need to co-regulate, so we're going to do the dishes, right? That's regulating in there. Maybe we're going to vacuum. Running the vacuum could be helpful if we know our kid's not like a super sensor, that noise isn't going to overwhelm them, but the sound may be really regulating. Or maybe we're going to put on a fan, right, in that room. What's helpful is to notice when our kids are in different steps. So my challenge for you guys, and maybe it's a youth you're working with, maybe it's a child yourself, maybe it's your partner, I want you to go home and I want you to list out green. This is how I know my child or my partner and myself are in the green zone. Yellow. This is what tells me that they're in the yellow zone, right? So they're being silly, they won't sit still, right? The red zone. This is how I know me or my child are in the red zone. They're screaming, they're yelling. I feel like this feeling is going to last forever, right? That's a big indicator. If we find ourselves telling our children, or feeling like our children, they're always going to be like this. This is never going to get better. This is always like this, right? That black and white thinking, a good sign that we're in our brainstem. Questions? I know it was a lot of information. I promise you, you could probably Google any key word I said today and get plenty of information if you find that. But the big thing is repetitive movement, and also, right, that provides modeling when you do it, and it builds relationship, right? So again, if I'm trying to engage you in dancing because I know you really like dancing, that shows I care, right? And if there's anything we know about trauma is we know that healing comes through relationships. So at the end of the day, kind of just building that relationship. Yeah.
I'm a teacher. I teach kindergarten. And we have like a social emotional learning person who gives us resources for our class and everything like that. So we did the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 this week. There are videos that can walk you through it. But there's also, might be like the mindfulness teacher or something. There's this YouTuber who does mindfulness videos and can kind of help with like that grounding. There's one where there's just bubbles that are bouncing around the screen, and it talks the kids through, okay, look at the yellow bubble. Don't think about anything else. Follow the yellow bubble, and then they're just doing that. And, my class will just sit there and watch the bubble, and it kind of brings them back to a place where we can, be learning again. If we were overstimulated.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And again, right, mindfulness being more of that green and yellow zone, right? And then where the bubbles, right, might be, if we're in red zone, maybe we're popping the bubbles, right? The lower we are, the bigger the movement. Zen Den is a really good YouTube channel, too, for that. What other questions or comments?
A thing that I find is useful for me to do, I actually sat down at one time and was like, I can't do anything perfectly. I can't make things happen that are exactly what I want them to be. But then I realized that one thing I can do is wash dishes. And I can pace. I can be a perfect pacer. There are things that I can do that I am greatly skilled at. Most of them are useless. Washing dishes, I found, is it's very therapeutic. And you can imagine whatever is bothering you is actually the gunk on the dishes, and then just wash that down the drain and let that go. And then when it's done, you've done something hey, that's beautiful. Put that aside. We're going to have a wonderful meal on these beautiful dishes.
Yeah, definitely. So he was saying, right, when I notice when I'm trying to do a task or something and it's not going how I want to, stepping away and doing something I know how to do, right? And you mentioned 2 really good regulating skills of washing the dishes, right, and pacing. And you even went into, again, more of a green zone thinking of I'm imagining I'm washing away some of my problems, things like that. And I think that's a big thing is utilizing skills that you can do within those zones, right? It's going to be really hard to do yoga and deep breathing if we're in our red zone, right? It's going to be really hard to sit there and do guided meditation in our red zone, right? Because we're in our red zone, we have all of these thoughts coming in, right? And so if it's quiet, they're going to keep coming in, right? And so focusing on those big body movements. What other questions? What do you think would be helpful to know or takeaways?
I have a thing, I can't quite put it to words right this second. 1 second, give me a second. Sometimes what you just said about if we're in a red zone, we won't want to deep breathe. And I've tried to convince people, hey, you seem pretty excited. Why don't you take a deep breath? And then they'll react as though I'm challenging them or threatening them. Like, it's breathing. Don't be afraid to breathe. And then when you tell them that they're being afraid to breathe, they start laughing because it's a ridiculous thing to fear.
Yeah, good. And that's where that right insight of okay, where are we at and what can we access, right? Where am I at myself, right? Maybe this is a problem or something I need to address, but I'm in my red zone, so I'm not going to do it effectively, right? So even if I wanted to, it's not going to work, right? Parents with their teens and they say I'm so tired of yelling at them. I'm yelling at them all the time. I've destroyed their room. And it's like, hey, you know what? If you were telling me it was working, I couldn't argue with you. But it's not even working, right? And of that, because you do know what does work, but we're not in the zone that we need to be in. And again, at the end of the day, co-regulation shows that no matter what you're going through, you can have these big feelings, you can have these big emotions, I'm still going to be here. Now, you can't disrespect me or start to abuse me, right? I'm going to set that boundary and I'm going to say, hey, you know what, you're raising your voice, it's hurting my feelings, I'm going to step away, let me know if you need help, right? And so the more you're able to kind of show that this is helpful, show that I'm there for you, then maybe not the first time, maybe not the second time that you co-regulate, but maybe the 8th time, they're joining you marching around the room, right? Or you're getting a call from the teacher saying, hey, you know what? John didn't throw his chair today, but he sat down and he scribbled on his paper. And you're like, yeah, that's wonderful. Or he didn't scream at his mom today, he counted the ceiling tiles, right? And again, through repetition and practice. I would say you can teach your child these red zone things, right? Red zone is where we can't control ourselves and we can't handle it. Yellow zone is when we're silly and want to have fun. And green zone is when we're ready to listen and when we're ready to learn, right? And so then when you notice that they're in the red zone or they're starting to slip, we can say, oh, we're in the red zone, like red zone activity, right? Or we're in the yellow zone, right? So that they can start to be mindful of their own bodies too. And again, can be a really helpful safety skill if we can learn what the red and yellow zone look for other people too.
When you just mentioned counting ceiling tiles, I just realized that my mother used to do these things. When I was 4 or 5, she was really pushy, and it was you get in trouble, you stand in the corner and stare at the corner and stuff like that. And then as I got older, I guess she was actually learning all this stuff, and she was like, count the ceiling tiles, do jumping jacks, do this. I'm like, okay, geez, what?
Perfect, yeah. Did you listen? Did you do them?
Yeah, we had to.
There you go. And you have some children who are like, F you, I'm not doing any of that, right? And that's where we regulate ourselves. And again, we're gonna, as we get to learn what their zones look like and where they're at, we know our children, we know what they like, we know what they're not gonna do, right? And so we're able to really use this information for things that they like and things that they do, right? Whether it's dancing, whether it's scribbling, maybe it's doing our makeup, right?
I think a big thing too is having the insight about when to know when to regulate, but also practicing when you're in a green state.
Yeah.
And making it a habit, so that, because if you're trying to tell yourself or a kid, okay, breathe, you're really angry, well, that's not going to really do anything for them. You have to teach them how to breathe through their nose into their stomach and breathe out to re-regulate themselves. So practicing when they're calm is really important. And I also think, like, as a kid, I'm not sure my parents really taught me how to regulate myself, so now I'm having to relearn that as an adult, which is kind of humbling because, you know, you think you have it figured out. And so I've had to, like, learn how to re-regulate myself based on a lot of things I'm learning.
Yeah, and it can be really tough, right? Because your body has always done these things that have helped you and served you, and we're trying to teach it to do something else. Where you say, you know, practice it when you're in your green zone, right? So that it becomes as much as a habit as your already existing trauma responses, right? So that it can serve you, right? If you're in your red zone, maybe you want to, you know, yell and throw and hit something, right? In that moment, maybe it feels good, but I bet 5 minutes later you're going to regret it.
Yes.
And you're going to feel bad, and you're going to apologize, and you're going to wish you didn't do that, right? And so in that moment, being able to take that new skill that you've been practicing and doing that may not in that moment feel as good as yelling and letting it out, right? But 5 minutes later, you're going to be happy that you did it, right? And then it's going to become habit. And then before you know it, you're not always going to red zone. You're going to yellow zone, right? And again, that repetition, like you said. So it's helpful to do that regulation every day, right? Maybe take 5-minute breaks, maybe 10-minute breaks, right? There's a reason why they gave us so many breaks today between the sessions, right? So we can get up and we can walk around and we can move our bodies. To be honest, they told us, like, have 15 minutes of information. They're going to have so many questions. Where are they at? Where are they at, Dante?
Now, I can just recall when my son was a baby, he would always cry, and I would pick him up and cry, and I would take him around the house just to see little things and just to soothe him or regulate him. And he'd start laughing and whatnot. Even the light switch, just pulling the light thing down is like what regulated.
Yeah.
So I'm just starting to cry.
Dante was just sharing when
he
his son was little and he would cry, we would pick him up and move him around or turn the light switch on and off, right? Those little regulating, and then he'd start to laugh, right, and come out of those. Or like right when they, you know, anyone who's had a baby, one of the first things they teach you in the hospital is to like shh and the rock, right, and the pat. All of those things, because it's super regulating, it's something the baby knows, right? Now, if you're a mom and have had your own child and you're in the grocery store and you see a baby crying, you notice yourself automatically doing the swaying, right? Because your body gets so used to doing those things. And again, practicing them when you're able to effectively do the regulation, then can hopefully become part of that habit. And for our children too, right? When they learn that. And when you're teaching that again and again.
I think this work, I'm a retired nurse, and I'm retired now, but I still do some caregiving. And one of my clients, she has always been so used to being in control of everything, and everything it's done at a certain way. So one day we went for a drive, and we came back, and someone had parked in her parking place. She just went off. I mean, she was so angry that this is a lady, 89 years old, on a walker. She wanted to crash her windows, open up the car doors, open up. I said, you can't do that. So finally, I got her to go. You know, we went into her apartment, and she was just, I said, what we need to do is just take some deep breaths. She looked at me. She said, you want me to do it? And she started. And so I did it with her. She calmed down, and she was calm for maybe about 10 minutes, and she started thinking again. Well, what? You're too nice. Why can't we go down there and open up our car doors? No.
Just like, listen, no, this is what we're going to do.
I want to call the Mexican police. No, we just don't do that. So I said, just think about it. What is going to happen if I permitted you and I go down and open up her doors? She stood. Well, let's take some more deep breaths.
Good, very good.
And so it really worked, just the techniques taking deep and being patient with her because I know she was a strong-willed person. It's her way or no way. So I just said, "B, what will happen to us? Just let's do some deep breaths again." And after doing it maybe 5 or 10 minutes, she calmed down and she said, "I feel bad. You were right. You're too good." So it works even with adults.
Yeah.
Especially those that it's been so used to being in control and with money, But I told her, I said, "Well, will it profit you? You don't want to do that." "Yes, I do, but you're too good. You don't want to do it." And then she just went on. And then I said, "Let's do the breathing."
How did you notice yourself feeling when she was like ready to go in on this car?
After being with her, knowing her temperament, I just knew that this was the only thing I can tell her at this point.
Yeah.
I just said, let's take some deep breaths. And I'm listening to it. So finally she said, push it about.
Yeah.
Like, I really don't want to do it, but you're telling me to do it. Then she said, "You're too good."
That's good, yeah.
Yeah.
And speaks a lot to your guys' relationship.
Well, yeah, that was
That she
part of it,
trusted
too.
you.
Yeah.
A thing about deep breathing is that you can get someone to sarcastically start deep breathing, but then they're just deep breathing, and so it's going to work anyway.
It will.
Yeah.
That's what happened with her. Because she was so strong-willed. But just looking at me and, you said, "Do it, I'm going to do it." And it really calms you.
Yeah, it is such a good exercise. Just that one thing is such a good exercise.
Good feeling, relaxation.
I'm not a deep breather. I will say that. Like, I'm one of those, like, if you told me to deep breath, like, I might fight you, right? But it can be helpful.
It is.
Right? And that's where I say having different things in your toolbox, right, could be super helpful in case one doesn't work. What other questions, comments? Does anybody have like any regulation skills that you use now or grounding skills now that you really like?
My counselor told me to balance on one foot because then I have to focus on not falling over.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I've done.
That's just a form of mindfulness meditation. Just focus on not falling over. That's really good. Yeah. I've never actually, yeah.
She's very, very sensitive to people who are upset, so she'll put her head in her lap and stay very, very still. And I'll have them feed her, water her, brush her hair, or just pet her. Sometimes I'll just both be laying on the floor, just being together. And I'm just amazed at how much therapy she does.
Yeah. Pets are really good regulating strategies, right? Because we're throwing the ball, or we're petting them, or brushing them, or running around with them. Or little siblings.
Little stress ball.
Yeah, it's just doing that repetitive action over and over.
Yeah.
Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze,
I use
squeeze.
that often. It
Yeah.
works.
So poppets can be really helpful right now, right?
You said the poppets?
The poppets.
Oh, yeah.
And so again, if nothing else, right, doing that regulation, you're modeling it and you're providing that visual for your child, right? Or for the partner or for someone else, right? Maybe it's a sound, maybe it's a movement. And at the very least, you're regulating your own. In case that isn't working, you can come up with something else, right? Regulation and grounding. Regulation is that idea of I am in a lower zone and I need access to a higher zone, right? So regulation is repetitive movement, right? The R and R. Grounding is my body feels unsafe. So I'm starting to feel those things like shaking or deep breathing. Maybe I'm daydreaming a lot. So grounding is our 5 senses and reminding ourselves that we are safe. We may be, right, in regulation, or it's become a habit of we can remind ourselves, either through affirmations or just remembrance of, I am here, I am safe, right? And so we can do those things while we're regulating or while we're grounding. And again, grounding is heightening those 5 senses.